Chile es un país que está en la parte sur de Sudamérica. Se estira desde un desierto en el norte, el desierto de Atacama, hasta Punta Arenas, que está en el sur, uno de los lugares más al sur del mundo. Tiene por un lado la cordillera y por el otro lado el océano, es un país delgado, ahí con los dos límites. La parte sur de Chile es uno de los lugares más lejanos en todo el mundo de Jerusalén, estando geográficamente en el hemisferio sur y desde ahí también en una distancia muy aislada, muy lejos de Jerusalén. Yeah, so my name is Felipe. I grew up in the southern part of Chile. If you think of Chile, it's very long. It's as far as New York to Los Angeles, and so there's a lot of stuff in between. We grew up kind of in the south, about 2/3 down. My parents were missionaries. So from a young age, all of my earliest memories were in South America. We actually moved to Ecuador when I was 3, and then after Ecuador moved to Chile. So up until my teenage years, I really didn't have much experience in the U.S. And my parents were American, obviously, but I kind of grew up completely immersed in the culture in Ecuador for a few years, and then primarily in Chile. So going to Chilean schools, learning to play soccer because that's what everybody does. You kind of have to. Part of the experience was my parents working with all sorts of different Christians, and so there's a Bible Institute that my father worked at and taught the Bible and taught classes. We worked in the church. They had different ministries. We actually worked with professional soccer players for a lot of the time there. I moved to the U.S. for college and was here then after college. I met my wife, Maggie, in college, and we got married, and I worked in Minneapolis for many years at a couple big companies there. After many years there, we actually had an experience where some of our friends that were college friends were planning to go to Japan, and they passed away tragically. And in that experience, we had sort of been wrestling through, should we consider going back to Chile or to South America? We always had an affinity or just really cared, a connection with the place and a love for it. For myself, especially growing up there, and so it was a huge move. We had some connections and basically said, worst case scenario, we move back after 6 months. And we moved and asked God to provide or for doors to open and looked for ways to connect with the community, and God opened doors for us. We had some really kind, generous friends that helped us out, helped me get a job, and we stayed for 2 years. So it was a big change. It was really tough, especially the first year. You learn a lot of things the hard way, but it was something that I don't think we would ever change or give up, and it was something that, despite all of our probably immaturity and shortcomings, God used to work in our hearts especially, and then hopefully make some impact to the community there. Yeah, I think what it means to be for all nations is, I think first off, it's a perspective. It's really, we all share the same faith, the same scripture, and so we can be united on the most important pieces. And so I think if you don't start with that perspective, then you're not, it's important to be open to what God is doing in the church, which is more than our church. It's the church, the global church. When you're in a predominant culture that you expect God to show up in certain ways because you've always seen it that way. But when you go into a context or a culture and it's different, now you depend on everyone. You depend on other people, and you depend on the Lord, and you depend hopefully on a church or someone, but it's in a different way because you now have nothing and you're stripped bare and you have to do life without all the resources and experience that you have. And it's amazing to see how God comes through in those situations. And it's amazing to see, I think, the work that He can do in our own hearts. And then also, I think it gives a perspective of to love people that are different, but you realize, and sometimes it takes a year, but you start to realize there's a richness there that I maybe didn't have, or I didn't see, or didn't appreciate. And now, and then when you come back, if the Lord leads you back, and that's, been our experience, you see people from other cultures or experiences or backgrounds with a completely set of new eyes. Because you're like, oh, I know what it's like to not speak the language well, or to, struggle through the schooling system, or not know how to talk to people, or the humor makes no sense to me. But it gives you a heart for, some of those people, just because you can understand and relate to that experience. And I think it gives you a heart for what the gospel is in terms of a global, it's God's heart is for all nations. When we went back, the church there was very generous in allowing us to get plugged in right away. They invited us to start working with the youth group there. These are families that, for the most part, didn't grow up in Christian homes. And so parents are raising their children, and in this case, a lot of teenagers who, they didn't know how to raise a teenager, with the gospel or studying the Bible. And a few of them ended up getting baptized. Mi nombre es Felipe, y de parte de mí y de mi familia, estamos muy agradecidos de ser parte de una iglesia que realmente cree y es para todas las naciones, no solamente aquí, sino que ve todas las naciones como parte del pueblo de Dios y tiene un deseo de alcanzar esas naciones con el Evangelio.